Yesterday, I was just another guy trying to get through the week. Today, I woke up married to an alien warrior, and she's staring at me like I'm supposed to fight a war for her. Ethan Carter had never been the kind of man to believe in fate. Life was random, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, but never mystical. He had spent most of his adult years in front of a screen, coding lines of software for a job he tolerated, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city. His routine was set in stone: work, eat, sleep, repeat. But last night, something changed. It had started with a harmless night out. His best friend, Jake, had dragged him to a local bar, arguing that Ethan needed to live a little. It was the usual scene: loud music, cheap beer, dim lighting, nothing out of the ordinary. That was until Ethan stepped outside for some fresh air and noticed a man sitting in the alleyway. The man looked homeless at first glance, wrapped in tattered robes, his long silver hair flowing down his back. But there was something otherworldly about him. His eyes gleamed an unnatural shade of violet, and his skin shimmered faintly under the neon glow of a flickering street lamp. "You," the man had said, pointing directly at Ethan. "You will do." Ethan had barely managed to ask, "Do what?" before the man pressed a cold metallic object into his palm. The sensation was immediate: a rush of warmth, a pulse of energy surging through his veins. Before he could react, a brilliant flash of light engulfed him, and then nothing. When Ethan opened his eyes, the first thing he registered was the cold, sterile air. The second was the sheer impossibility of his surroundings. The room was massive, its walls smooth and metallic, illuminated by a soft, pulsating blue glow. Strange symbols flickered along the edges of the floor, forming patterns that shifted as if they were alive. The air smelled crisp, carrying a hint of something metallic and unfamiliar. And then he saw her. She stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed over her armored chest, watching him with sharp, calculating eyes. Her form was unmistakably humanoid but undeniably alien. Her skin bore a faint lavender hue, smooth and unblemished, with intricate silver markings that ran down her arms like veins of liquid metal. Her eyes, a deep, luminous gold, locked onto him with an intensity that made his breath catch. She was taller than him by at least a few inches, and her body radiated strength. The suit she wore clung to her frame, made of a material that shimmered between fabric and armor, emphasizing her powerful build. A long, braided strand of jet black hair cascaded down her back, secured by a silver clasp in the shape of an unfamiliar emblem. Ethan swallowed hard. "Where the hell am I?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. The woman tilted her head, studying him like he was some strange specimen. Then, she spoke, her voice smooth, controlled, but carrying an undeniable edge. "You are aboard the warship Valkyros, en route to Zelara. You are my husband." Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry. I'm your what?" Her golden eyes narrowed slightly, as if annoyed by the question. "My husband. You were chosen through the rite of bonding. The ceremony was completed last night." Ethan sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it. His head swam, a residual dizziness from whatever had happened to him. "There's been a mistake," he said, rubbing his temples. "I don't even know you. I didn't agree to any kind of bonding, right, or whatever the hell you call it." The woman's expression remained impassive. "The choice was not yours to make. The rite selected you." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "That sounds like kidnapping. Pretty sure that's illegal where I come from." She stepped closer, and Ethan instinctively tensed. "Among my people," she said, "marriage is sacred. The rite does not make mistakes. You are bound to me now. There is no undoing it." Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Okay, let's say, hypothetically, I believe you. Who are you? My name is Zelara, daughter of High Commander Velcaris of Zelvaria. I am a warrior of the Celestial Guard. Ethan let that sink in. And why would a warrior need a husband? A flicker of something unreadable passed across Zelara's face before she answered. The Zelvarian race is in a time of war. Our bloodlines must be strengthened. The rite ensures that our warriors are paired with suitable partners. You were chosen because you carry the ancestral mark, one that has not been seen for centuries. Ethan blinked again. I think you have the wrong guy. She shook her head. The mark does not appear by chance. It is woven into your DNA. Ethan's heart pounded. DNA? That meant this wasn't just a mistake, it was something inside him, something he had no control over. He looked down at his hand, the one where the strange man had pressed a metallic object against him. The skin there still tingled faintly. Zelara was watching him closely, her expression unreadable. You may not understand now, she said, but you are bound to me. To my people. You must prepare. Prepare for what? He asked warily. For war. The word sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. Yesterday, he had been just another guy trying to get through the week. Today, he was the husband of an alien warrior, and somehow, he had just become part of a battle that was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Ethan sat motionless on the metallic surface of the bed, his mind racing. The air inside the warship was thick with an unplaceable energy, something humming just beneath the surface of his perception. A part of him wanted to believe this was just an incredibly vivid dream, one he would wake up from at any moment. But the cool sensation of the metal beneath his fingers and the unwavering gaze of Zelara told him otherwise. So, Ethan finally said, voice dry. What exactly happens now? Zelara tilted her head slightly, as if analyzing him. You will begin your training immediately. He let out a short laugh. Training? For what? For war. Ethan stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. All right, let's pump the brakes for a second. I'm not a soldier. I'm a software engineer. I write code, I drink coffee, and the only fights I've been in involve customer service representatives. Zelara did not smile. In fact, her expression did not shift in the slightest. The rite of bonding does not pair warriors with a weak. The mark in your DNA is proof of your bloodline. Ethan sighed, exasperated. You keep saying that like it explains everything. What bloodline? I was born in Chicago, raised in Nebraska. There is nothing alien about me. Zelara stepped closer, her piercing golden eyes scanning his features. The mark identifies you as a descendant of the first guardian. It is an ancient bond, one that predates the stars as we know them. You are more than human, Ethan Carter. A cold knot twisted in his stomach. He wanted to reject it outright, to insist this was a mistake, but the memory of the silver-haired man in the alleyway resurfaced. The strange object, the pulse of energy, and now, this. I don't know what you expect from me, he muttered. Zelara uncrossed her arms. Expectations are irrelevant. You will fulfill your role. Ethan took a breath, trying to steady himself. What if I refuse? Zelara's expression darkened. Then you die. A sharp chill ran down his spine. That's dramatic. It is the truth, she countered, voice devoid of emotion. Enemies of the Zelvarian people will come for you. They will not care if you are willing or unwilling. Your existence alone makes you a target. Ethan swallowed hard. So, what? My choices are train or die. Zelara nodded. Yes. The training began sooner than Ethan expected. Within hours, he was led through winding corridors, each filled with beings he could barely process. Tall, armored warriors, engineers with glowing visors, and even creatures that looked like nothing from Earth. It was overwhelming, and yet, he couldn't deny the sheer awe of it. The training chamber was massive and open space lined with glowing platforms, holographic dummies, and weapons that hummed with energy. Zelara stood before him, a long blade in her grip, its edges shimmering with an eerie blue light. Pick a weapon, she instructed, gesturing to the wall where an array of alien arms were displayed. Ethan hesitated. I'm more of a non-violent kind of guy. Zelara's gaze was sharp. Then you will die a non-violent kind of death. Seriously, you need to work on your pep talks. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. This is not a game, Ethan. The right does not bond warriors with weaklings. If you do not fight, you will perish. And so will I. That made him pause. Wait. What do you mean? The bond is sacred. If one falls, the other follows. Ethan's mouth went dry. You're telling me, if I die, you die? She nodded, unflinching. And vice versa? A slow realization settled over him. He wasn't just responsible for his own life anymore. His survival meant hers. And hers meant his. For the first time, the weight of what had happened to him truly sank in. He was no longer just Ethan Carter, software engineer. He was bound to a warrior of an alien race, marked by an ancient power he didn't understand. And whether he liked it or not, he had no choice but to fight. Ethan's breath came in short, sharp bursts. His muscles ached, sweat trickling down his spine as he dodged another incoming strike. Zelara's blade sliced through the air, missing him by mere inches. His instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of the training chamber loomed high around him, enclosing him in this brutal lesson of survival. Enough, he gasped, stumbling backward. I need a second. Zelara lowered her blade, expression unreadable. The enemy will not grant you a second. Ethan doubled over, hands on his knees. Yeah, well, I doubt the enemy is going to be my newly acquired alien wife, so maybe cut me some slack. Zelara studied him for a moment before sighing. You are not completely useless. Wow. That almost sounded like a compliment. She sheathed her blade and stepped back. You lasted longer than I expected. That is a start. Ethan wiped his forehead. His body felt battered, his mind even more so. In the span of a single day, he had been ripped from his old life, thrown into an arranged marriage with a warrior, and was now being trained to fight in a war he didn't understand. The sheer absurdity of it all made his head spin. What exactly am I supposed to be training for? He asked, straightening up. You keep saying war, but with who? Zelara's gaze hardened. The KRYNN? Ethan frowned. And they are. Zelara turned, activating a holographic display. A series of images flickered to life, a race of creatures with jagged armor like exoskeletons, eyes burning like embers, and elongated limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Even in the still projections, they exuded menace. They are conquerors. Destroyers of worlds, Zelara said, voice clipped with controlled fury. They have hunted my people for generations, seeking to claim what is not theirs. Ethan swallowed hard. And let me guess, they won't stop until you're all wiped out. She nodded. The war has raged for centuries. Zelara has held them at bay, but we cannot hold forever. That is why the right exists. to ensure our warriors are bound to those who can strengthen us. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. Okay, but I still don't get it. What do I have that makes me so special? Zelara's eyes flickered to his hand. The mark in your blood. The Guardian's lineage. That's not an answer, he pressed. What does it actually mean? She hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough for Ethan to catch it. Then, she turned off the hologram and faced him fully. It means you may be our only hope. Ethan let out a hollow laugh. Great. No pressure then. Training continued, relentless and unforgiving. Every time he thought he had reached his limit, Zelara pushed him further. Hours passed, then days, each one blurring into the next. His body grew stronger, his reflexes sharper, but the constant exhaustion gnawed at him. One night, after a particularly grueling session, Ethan collapsed onto his bunk. His limbs felt like lead, his mind a fog of fatigue. Just as he closed his eyes, a voice interrupted his rest. Ethan. He cracked one eye open to find Zelara standing by the doorway, her expression unreadable as always. But there was something different about her posture, something almost hesitant. What now? He groaned. She stepped closer. You have done well. Ethan blinked. That almost sounded like praise. A flicker of amusement crossed her face before vanishing. You are adapting. Faster than I anticipated. Ethan let out a breath. I don't exactly have a choice. Zelara studied him for a long moment before speaking. You do. Many would have broken by now. Ethan sat up, meeting her gaze. So, what happens next? Her expression hardened. Next, we test whether you are truly ready. A cold feeling settled in his gut. And what does that mean? Zelara turned toward the door, pausing only briefly. Tomorrow, you face real combat. Ethan felt the weight of those words settle over him like a lead blanket. Tomorrow, I fight for my life. Ethan sat cross-legged on the cold floor of the warship's meditation chamber, staring at his hands. His fingers trembled slightly, though not from exhaustion. A sensation still lingered within him, an electric hum beneath his skin, like the pulse of something waiting to be unleashed. Across from him, Zelara watched in silence. She had brought him here after the trial, insisting that he needed to focus. What did I do back there? Ethan finally asked, breaking the tense quiet. That wasn't normal. Zelara nodded. No, it wasn't. You accessed something buried deep in your lineage. Ethan let out a hollow laugh. Great. And what does that mean exactly? Zelara exhaled, choosing her words carefully. Your ancestors were not mere humans, Ethan. The Guardian's lineage, your bloodline, was intertwined with something greater. A power that has been dormant for generations. Ethan frowned. So, what? I'm some kind of half-alien. No, she said. But you are not entirely ordinary, either. Ethan shook his head, frustration building. That's not an answer. What am I supposed to do with this? Zelara studied him for a long moment before she finally spoke. You must learn to control it. Hours passed as Zelara guided him through breathing exercises, trying to tap into whatever force had awakened within him. But no matter how hard he focused, he felt nothing but the distant echo of what had happened in battle. Ethan groaned, rubbing his temples. This is pointless. You are impatient, Zelara remarked, arms crossed. Power does not emerge on command. It must be nurtured. Ethan exhaled sharply. And what happens if I can't control it? if it takes over at the wrong moment. Zelara's golden eyes held a flicker of something concerned. Then you will become a danger to yourself and everyone around you? That was not the answer Ethan wanted. Later that night, Ethan lay in his quarters, sleep eluding him. His mind replayed the battle trial over and over, searching for the exact moment something had shifted. He had felt it like a switch flipping inside him, a flood of energy unlike anything he had known. But how had he triggered it? Frustrated, he clenched his fist and suddenly, the sensation returned. It was faint, but there. A warmth spreading from his core, tingling in his fingertips. His pulse quickened. Was this it? Was this the power Zelara spoke of? A sudden knock on the door jolted him from his thoughts. He sat up as Zelara stepped inside, her expression unusually tense. We have a problem. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What kind of problem? She hesitated. The KRYNN have found us. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. And let me guess, we can't outrun them. No, Zelara confirmed grimly. We fight. Ethan swallowed hard. The power within him might be stirring, but he wasn't ready. Not for this. Yet ready or not, war was coming. The alarm blared across the warship, a deep, pulsing sound that sent a spike of adrenaline through Ethan's body. He barely had time to throw on his gear before the ship rocked violently. The KRYNN had arrived, and they weren't wasting time. Zelara's voice cut through the comms. Battle formations. Defensive units to the lower decks. Ethan, meet me at the bridge now. Ethan sprinted through the corridors, his heart hammering. He had never been in a real battle, and despite everything, he still felt like an outsider in this war. But there was no turning back. When he reached the bridge, the sight before him stole his breath. Beyond the massive viewing panels, a fleet of KRYNN warships loomed, their sleek, predatory designs glinting against the void of space. They moved in precise, terrifying formations, sharks encircling wounded prey. Zelara stood at the command console, her posture rigid with tension. They outnumber us 3-1, she said, not taking her eyes off the tactical display. We need a strategy? Ethan swallowed hard. Do we have one? Zelara's gaze flickered to him. Not yet. A blast rocked the ship, sending sparks flying from the ceiling. Ethan braced himself against the console as the lights flickered. A voice crackled through the ship's comms. Shields at 60%. Enemy boarding parties inbound. Zelara cursed under her breath. We can't let them take the ship. She turned to Ethan. I need you to fight. His stomach clenched. I don't even know what I'm doing. You survived the trial, she said firmly. Now survive this. The corridors were chaos. The KRYNN had breached the ship in multiple locations, their warriors cutting through defenses like a wildfire. Ethan found himself thrust into the heart of the battle, gripping the energy blade Zelara had given him. It felt both foreign and familiar in his hands. A KRYNN warrior charged at him, its insectoid armor gleaming under the ship's emergency lights. Ethan barely dodged the first strike, feeling the heat of plasma burn past his cheek. He countered on instinct, his blade meeting the KRYNN's weapon with a burst of sparks. The force of the impact nearly knocked him off balance. The KRYNN were faster, stronger. But Ethan had something they didn't see, something stirring inside him, waking up. As another KRYNN lunged, time seemed to slow. The same sensation from the trial returned, a sharpening of his senses, a clarity beyond thought. He sidestepped effortlessly, his blade moving before he willed it. The KRYNN fell in a single stroke. Ethan stared at his own hands. What was this power? No time to dwell. More enemies swarmed, and he fought with a speed and precision he didn't know he possessed. But no matter how many fell, more took their place. The ship shuddered violently. Over the comms, a panicked voice rang out, "They are taking engineering. If they disable the core, we'll lose everything." Zelara's voice cut in. "Ethan, you're closest. Get there now." Ethan took off running. His breath came in ragged bursts, his muscles burning, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. When he reached engineering, the scene was worse than he feared. KRYNN warriors swarmed the reactor core, their weapons slicing through the last line of defenders. The core pulsed erratically. If it was damaged further, the ship would be lost. Ethan didn't hesitate. He threw himself into the fray, striking down the nearest KRYNN with brutal efficiency. His body moved on its own, guided by something beyond him. He could feel the power building inside, an energy begging to be released. And then, in the heart of battle, it happened. A KRYNN soldier aimed a plasma rifle at him. Ethan barely registered the movement. His body reacted faster than thought. He raised his hand, and instead of gripping his blade, something else answered. A wave of pure energy exploded from his palm, slamming into the KRYNN with the force of a collapsing star. The enemy was thrown back, colliding with a wall in a sickening crunch. The remaining warriors hesitated, fear flashing in their alien eyes. Ethan stared at his hand, chest heaving. What the hell? The power coursed through him, untamed and raw. He felt like he could rip the entire room apart if he willed it. Zelara's voice echoed in his ear. "Ethan, report." He forced himself to focus. "Engineering is secure," he said, still dazed. "But, we need to talk." A pause. Then, "Understood. Get back to the bridge. Now." As Ethan made his way back, his mind swirled with questions. What had he just done? What was this power inside him? And if it was growing stronger, what did that mean for him? One thing was certain, the war had only just begun. The ship trembled beneath Ethan's feet as the KRYNN fleet descended upon them. Alarms blared, red warning lights flashing across the bridge like angry eyes. The weight of expectation pressed down on him. Everyone was watching, waiting for the so-called guardian to lead them to victory. But was he ready? Zelara stood beside him, her golden eyes sharp as ever. "You're in control now," she said. "This is the moment we fight back." Ethan exhaled, trying to ignore the gnawing doubt in his chest. He had spent hours training, learning to wield the power that had chosen him. But training was one thing. War was another. The tactical screen in front of them displayed the enemy's formation, a wall of death approaching fast. KRYNN warships, sleek and cruel, advanced in perfect synchronization. They had learned from their mistakes. This time, there would be no reckless charges. This was a calculated annihilation. Ethan clenched his fists. "What's the plan?" Zelara didn't hesitate. "We hit them before they can surround us. Focus fire on their command ship, cut off the head, and the body dies." Ethan nodded, swallowing his fear. "Let's do it." The ship surged forward, engines roaring as it led the charge. Fighters screamed past them, weaving through space like a swarm of angry wasps. Explosions flared as the battle ignited, energy beams crisscrossing the void. Ethan stood at the heart of the storm, stationed near the ship's reactor core. If the KRYNN tried to board again, this was where they would strike. The comms crackled. "Enemy dropships incoming." Zelara's voice followed immediately. Ethan, prepare for boarding combat. He tensed, gripping the energy blade at his hip. This was it. A violent jolt rocked the ship as the KRYNN forced an entry. The sound of metal being torn apart echoed through the corridors, followed by the telltale hiss of depressurization. They were here. The first KRYNN warrior burst through the breach, its insectoid armor glinting under the emergency lights. Ethan moved before he could think, his blade meeting the enemies in a shower of sparks. The force of the impact rattled his bones, but he held firm. More KRYNN poured in, their movements precise and deadly. Ethan fought with everything he had, blocking, countering, striking. The battle blurred into a storm of motion. And then, it happened again. A surge of energy built within him, raw and electric. He barely registered the moment his instincts took over. With a single outstretched hand, he unleashed a wave of force that sent the KRYNN flying. They crashed into walls, their weapons torn from their grips. Ethan gasped, staring at his trembling hands. The power was stronger now, more refined but still wild, still unpredictable. Zelara's voice cut through the comms. Ethan. Report. He steadied himself. I'm fine. The KRYNN aren't. A beat of silence. Then, good. We're pushing forward. Get to the bridge. Ethan took a deep breath and ran. The bridge was chaos. Officers barked orders, monitors flickered with damage reports, and outside, the KRYNN fleet loomed like a closing fist. The command ship sat at the center of it all, untouched. Zelara turned as he entered. We need an opening. Your power might be the key. Ethan hesitated. I don't even know what I did back there. You don't need to. She stepped closer, her voice low but urgent. Trust it. Trust yourself. Outside, the enemy's weapons charged for a final assault. They were running out of time. Ethan clenched his jaw. Fear had held him back long enough. He closed his eyes, reaching inward. The energy within him pulsed, waiting. Instead of resisting, he embraced it. When he opened his eyes, the ship was bathed in light. The KRYNN fleet never saw it coming. A pulse of raw power erupted from the ship, slamming into the enemy forces like a tidal wave. The nearest warships buckled under the force, their systems shorting out in an instant. The command ship wavered, its shields flickering. Zelara seized the opportunity. All batteries fire. A volley of missiles and energy blasts tore through the weakened enemy flagship. Explosions rippled across its hull, and then, with a final detonation, it shattered into the void. The remaining KRYNN ships hesitated. Leaderless. Vulnerable. And then they retreated. The battle was won. Silence hung heavy over the bridge as the realization sank in. They had survived. They had driven the KRYNN back. But Ethan barely heard the cheers. He could still feel the power thrumming beneath his skin, stronger than before. The battle had changed something inside him. It had awakened something deeper. Zelara approached, her gaze unreadable. You did it. Ethan let out a shaky breath. Yeah. But at what cost? She studied him for a long moment. That's something only you can decide. He wasn't sure he liked that answer. As the stars stretched before them, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The KRYNN were gone. The battlefield was quiet. Yet, Ethan felt no triumph. The remnants of their enemies drifted through space, wreckage scattering like dust. Victory should have felt satisfying. Instead, it weighed on him, heavy and cold. His hands still tingled from the energy he had unleashed, from the raw force that had torn through their foes like a celestial storm. He had never meant to become a destroyer. Zelara stood at the bridge's viewport, arms crossed, golden eyes reflecting the flickering lights of dying ships. "They won't stay gone," she said finally. "They'll regroup. They always do." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "And next time?" Zelara turned to face him, studying him with something close to concern. "Next time, we'll be ready. And so will you." That was what worried him the most. The medical bay was filled with the wounded. Ethan walked through the rows of injured soldiers, his people now. Some looked at him with admiration, others with fear. He had done something unnatural in that battle, something that defied reason. And they had all seen it. A young warrior, her arm wrapped in biomesh, glanced up as he passed. Her expression was uncertain. "Guardian," she murmured. He paused. "Just Ethan." Her brow furrowed, as if that was a foreign concept to her. To them, he was more than a man now. He was a force, a weapon, a symbol. Was that all he had become? Zelara found him in the training hall hours later. He was alone, staring at his own hands, flexing his fingers as if he could force them to feel normal again. "You're afraid of it," she said. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Shouldn't I be?" She stepped closer. "No. Fear weakens control. Power responds to will. You must master it, or it will master you." He met her gaze. "And if it already has?" Zelara studied him for a long moment before drawing her weapon. Without warning, she lunged. Instinct took over. Ethan's hand shot up, and the air crackled with energy. A shimmering force erupted between them, stopping her blade inches from his throat. But it didn't stop there. The power surged outward, knocking Zelara off her feet. She twisted in midair, landing in a crouch. But the shock in her eyes was undeniable. Ethan's heart pounded. "See? It's not controlled. It's a damn storm inside me." Zelara stood slowly. "Then we must teach you how to navigate the storm." Training was brutal. Every day, Zelara pushed him to his limits. Every time he thought he had control, the power would surge, unpredictable and wild. The more he fought it, the harder it pushed back. One night, exhausted and battered, he collapsed onto the floor of the training hall. Sweat dripped from his brow. "This isn't working." Zelara crouched beside him. "Because you are trying to suppress it. You must accept it, become part of it." Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "Easy for you to say. You weren't the one who nearly tore a warship in half." Zelara hesitated. Then, softly, she said, "I've seen what happens to those who fear their own power. They either lose themselves, or they let it consume them." Ethan looked up at her, something dark stirring in his chest. "What if I'm already too far gone?" She reached out, pressing a hand to his chest. "Then we bring you back." Days passed. Then weeks. Ethan fought. Not just the KRYNN, but himself. Every battle, every test of his strength, every moment of doubt, it all built toward something inevitable. And then, one day, the storm within him didn't rage. It flowed. He stood at the edge of the warship's observation deck, looking out at the stars. His power pulsed beneath his skin, but this time, it wasn't clawing for release. It was steady. Controlled. Zelara joined him, standing quietly by his side. You feel it, don't you? Ethan nodded. Yeah. The war isn't over, she reminded him. I know. She turned to face him fully. Then tell me, Guardian, what happens next? Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of what was to come. He opened them again, and for the first time since this all began, he knew his answer. We win. The KRYNN's fleet loomed before them, a vast, undulating mass of warships, each pulsing with the eerie glow of their biomechanical technology. This was their last push, their final attempt to crush the resistance. If they succeeded, there would be no second chance. Ethan stood at the bridge of the warship Celestial Dawn, staring at the incoming armada. His fingers curled into fists, and beneath his skin, the energy hummed, not chaotic, not wild, but ready. Zelara placed a hand on his shoulder. This is it. He turned to her, searching her golden eyes for any sign of fear. There was none. Just unwavering determination. She had been raised for battle. He had been thrust into it. And yet, in this moment, he felt like they stood as equals. What's the plan? He asked. Zelara's lips curved into a smirk. Survive. The battle erupted in fire and chaos. Ships twisted and dove through the void, weapons blazing. Explosions rippled across the battlefield as the resistance forces fought with everything they had. But the KRYNN were relentless, their ships moving with eerie synchronization, as if guided by a single mind. Ethan stood at the heart of it, no longer just a man, no longer just a soldier. He was something else now. A force of nature. A KRYNN warship broke through the defense lines, its cannons charging for a devastating blast. Ethan didn't think he acted. With a sweep of his hand, a wave of pure energy surged outward, colliding with the ship. The metal groaned, twisted, and then shattered into dust. For a moment, silence hung over the battlefield. Then the KRYNN adjusted. Their attacks became more erratic, unpredictable. They feared him now. Good. On the enemy flagship, High Commander Rexeth observed the battle with cold calculation. His black eyes narrowed as he studied Ethan through the holographic projections. The anomaly, he murmured. He is the key? A subordinate shifted nervously. Shall we retreat? Rexeth's lips curled. No. We adapt. The KRYNN flagship shifted, its form pulsing with new energy. It wasn't retreating. It was evolving. Ethan barely had time to react before a searing pain lanced through his body. The KRYNN had found a way to counter him. A weapon specifically designed to attack whatever force flowed within him. He stumbled, the world spinning. Zelara was at his side in an instant, catching him before he could collapse. Ethan. He gritted his teeth, fighting through the agony. They changed their tactics. Zelara's expression darkened. Then so do we? She lifted him to his feet, pressing her forehead to his. No matter what happens, you are not alone in this. The words steadied him. Gave him focus. He clenched his fists, summoning every ounce of strength left in him. Then let's finish this. The final battle was unlike anything before. The KRYNN's flagship unleashed waves of disruptive energy, each pulse threatening to unravel him. But Ethan didn't fight against it. He let it come. Let it weave into his power. And then he turned it back on them. The energy lashed outward in a final, devastating strike. The KRYNN flagship trembled, its core destabilizing. Rexeth's expression flickered with something Ethan had never seen before: fear. Then, in a blinding flash, the KRYNN's flagship was no more. The remaining KRYNN forces faltered. Leaderless, broken, they scattered. Some fled. Others simply stopped fighting. It was over. Ethan stood on the battlefield, breathing heavily. Around him, the resistance forces were cheering, celebrating. But he felt hollow. Zelara appeared at his side, her golden eyes searching his. "You did it." He shook his head. "We did." She hesitated, then reached for his hand. He let her take it. "So, what now?" she asked. Ethan looked up at the stars, at the vast unknown stretching before them. The war was won, but the battle within him still raged. He wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time, he was ready to find out.